So we are seeing repeated evidence that households across the country are experiencing rising prices and stagnating incomes, meaning many are now financially unsustainable. So with the news that inflation is getting even worse than we had initially predicted, this situation is now only getting more and more serious for millions of households. So on one side, we know that the prices of goods and services are rising at this extraordinary pace. And the biggest driver of this is energy bills, which have risen by 53% and are set to rise even further when the price cap increases in October. But the price we pay for food has also risen, between 10 and 15% on average, but with some reports suggesting that particular products have actually doubled in price. So despite these prices already rising to record levels, it is likely that we're not even in the eye of the storm yet, as inflation is likely to rise even further as those key goods like wheat and oil are going to be cut off following the war in Ukraine. So the ultimate effect of this is with the Bank of England recently warned that apocalyptic food prices are now on the near horizon. Now, the common theme with all of these goods is that they're essentials. This presents a really critical challenge to low-income households in particular for two reasons. One is because they spend such a great proportion of their income on these essential goods, more so than everybody else. So a rise in their prices disproportionately dominates their household budgets. And two is because they're essential products. So you can't spend less on these goods without incurring significant social harm. So if the price of beer goes up, we'd all likely spend less going to the pub. But when heating bills go up, that choice is much darker. But this is just one side of the story. This all depends on how incomes respond to rising prices. If they rise with prices, then problem solved, but we haven't seen that. In fact, incomes for most households have barely kept up, as pay growth this year has only risen by around 3%. And if you're on welfare, you would have seen your income cut by £20 a week last September. So from one direction, we have rising prices of essential products that you can't realistically spend less on. And on the other side, you have incomes either failing to keep up or in some cases falling. The effect this all has together is a once-in-a-generation squeeze on household budgets. So what households have left over at the end of the month is just getting smaller and smaller. But for some households, they've already gone over this brink. We found in our latest UK outlook that 1.5 million households across the country now face food and energy bills that are greater than their disposable income. These households would have to spend 190% of their income just to cover the absolute basics. Now, this is a critical situation to be in, as your disposable income essentially presents a hard upper bound on what you're able to cope with. Going over that is not really an option. But we instead expect these households to have to either dip into whatever savings they have left, which is almost certainly negligible, or tell the energy provider that they simply can't pay their bills and will have to go into long-term debt as a result. So partly as a result of this, we estimate at NISA that 250,000 households will end up in destitution, an extreme form of poverty, bringing the total to around 1 million households. So the key message we have is that the Chancellor has effective and immediate policy options available to him that would help alleviate the pain this is causing low-income households. The question is, what can be done about this? Well, the Chancellor did already try to intervene in the spring statement, but our analysis was that just tinkering with national insurance and the odd cash transfer really doesn't make a dent. Nobody is asking the Chancellor to fully offset the effect of rising prices. Doing that would likely be futile and throw way too much heat into the economy, which would make the situation worse. But what we can do is, like other organisations have suggested, including the CBI recently, is to just focus help on the poorest households, making sure they're not any more impacted by this situation than anybody else. Now, let's be clear. Given the global economic conditions, it is normal that everyone's income falls to some degree, but it is not a given that the poorest households will see their real incomes fall more than the rest. We found those poorest households have seen their real incomes fall further than the rest by a collective total of £4.2 billion. Policymakers need to target this figure, not trying to totally alleviate the effect of inflation, but just ensure that the poorest households aren't hit any harder than the rest of the country. So with that in mind, we suggest two policies that could help. First is a temporary uplift to universal credit of £25 a week, which if enacted for 6 months would cost a total of £1.35 billion and would be the most effective way to get cash into the hands of those who need it the most. A second is a one-off cash transfer to the poorest households of £250, which would cost an additional £2.85 billion. But obviously the question is, can we afford more borrowing? And if we could, would handing out more cash actually make inflation worse? Well, thinking about the first, the Office for Budget Responsibility provides the government with estimates of what they call fiscal headroom, which essentially measures how much additional borrowing the government could commit to without adverse economic consequences. Now that figure currently stands at £10 billion, which we suggest should be spent on cushioning the effects inflation is having on the poorest households. On the concern over inflation, we have in fact modelled this scenario using our economic models here at NISA. We didn't find any significant effects on inflation that would be any cause for concern, likely because the households who would benefit from these policies only make up quite a small proportion of the economy. So our message is clear. We know precisely who should be helped during the cost of living crisis, how to do it, and have confirmed that doing so wouldn't have any adverse economic consequences. The argument against intervention has therefore run out of road, and the time to act is now.